Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Danny Haiphong. Welcome back to another stream. So we have a very special show for you today because we are announcing what will be ongoing bi-weekly episodes, as best as we can, at least, with Scott Ritter, friend of the show. And we're going to change the format up a little bit. It's going to be a bit more conversational, a bit more debate and dialogue, because there are so many viewpoints that we need to air out and ensure that the cause of peace is being done justice here on this channel. Today, we're going to focus on some really important topics, some of the most pressing topics in geopolitics today that are shaping the future of our world. So let us not waste any time here. Here we have Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, author, geopolitical analyst, and so much more. Scott, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing all right. So we should get started. Everybody, make sure you hit the like button as you come onto the stream, because that helps boost this stream in YouTube's algorithm. But Scott, I wanted to get started with this subject of Yemen, Ansarallah. We've talked about it on this show before, but since our last conversation, we had Ansarallah target the Ben Gurion airport, the power plant in Haifa, and there are reports that they have essentially, through their missile systems, forced the USS Harry Truman to escape out of the area about 1,500 kilometers, that massive aircraft carrier, 1,500 kilometers away from where they were trying to assault Yemen. Now, the U.S. and the UK are bombing Yemen. They've bombed Yemen about 700 times over the course of the last several years. And so I wanted to ask you, though, because there's this bombshell report, in my opinion, in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you saw it, but essentially I'm just going to read a passage from it on how Israel is going to respond, because Israel's also been bombing Yemen. So a former Israeli diplomat, Alan Pincus, says Israel's best option for a long-term solution to the problem posed by the Houthis, Ansarallah, might be focused on building a U.S.-led regional coalition with Gulf countries also threatened by the growing aggression of the Houthis, for example, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But this would require Israel to make difficult compromises with the Palestinians. But acting alone with the Houthis, who have snarled international trade by attacking ships in the Red Sea, Israel risks turning an international problem into its sole responsibility. So, Scott, we've talked a lot about the axis of resistance, talked a lot about the difficult time that the axis of resistance has had. But what does Yemen, as an additional, Ansarallah, as an additional member of the axis of resistance, bring to the table here, as it seems that the U.S. and Israel and the forces involved in the genocide in Gaza and this regional war are scrambling to figure this out?
Well, I have a little bit of an advantage here because I've been communicating with somebody as a journalist who is with the Yemeni government's Ministry of Information, in the Ministry of Defense, their Department of Information. And I've talked to them about Yemen's role in the axis of resistance. And while they acknowledge that they are part of what is loosely called the axis of resistance, they take umbrage at any notion that they are controlled by Iran or influenced by Iran. In fact, he emphasized several times that the decision to intervene on behalf of Palestine, which is why Yemen is doing what it's doing, was a decision made by the Yemenis without consultation with anybody. They just said, this is what we're going to do. He did not deny that since that time, that Iran has provided assistance, or Iran is in consultations to coordinate, but not control. The Yemeni are doing, or the Houthi are doing what the Houthi want to do, when the Houthi want to do it, how the Houthi want to do it. The Palestine 2 hypersonic missile is a indigenous system that makes use of Iranian components in the guidance and control and things of that nature. But the Yemeni, the Houthi, have a missile production facility. They're able to produce solid propellant. This isn't stuff you produce in your bathtub. It's the safety constraints and the quality control is, has to be top notch, especially if you're, producing a hypersonic missile. But they've done this. They've produced it, so we've seen the testing of it. So it's not as though this missile comes from Iran. It's a Houthi missile, and the Houthi are going to use it the way they want to use it. So the idea that there's an indirect approach to the Houthi, meaning you can go through Iran, you can put pressure on Iran, or you can put regional pressure, is absurd. And I think anybody who thinks that the Houthi are going to flinch in the face, I mean, what is this regional alliance going to do? Has anybody looked at a map and understand why, for instance, every time the Saudis try to punch in there, they get wiped out? You're entering the territory of the Houthi, you're extending your lines of communication, and you're creating plenty of opportunity for, being pinched off, stalled, isolated, killed. The Houthi have been fighting since 2014. This war is not new to them. And they haven't been defeated. And they've been, the Israeli aircraft have different pilots, maybe a couple different electronic components. But, the F-15 is the F-15, the F-16 is the F-16. And the bombs they drop are the same bombs. So, the Houthi aren't going to lose any sleep having Israeli aircraft or American aircraft or French aircraft come at them. And the fact that they continue to fire missiles every night shows that it continues to be a very difficult thing to strike what they call mobile relocatable targets or mobile missile launchers.
Scott, you're exactly right in terms of this idea that attempting to pressure Iran or pressure what are assumed to be Yemen's Ansar Allah's adversaries like Saudi Arabia and UAE could be folly. Even Foreign Policy magazine says Yemenis do not receive or expect, this is a knock on them, the Ansar Allah to provide services like food, medical care, or education. But after a decade of bombings from Saudi Arabia, they are dug in and can absorb intense attacks, while their importance and popularity have soared with each blow. Scott, help us understand, because in my estimation, what the Wall Street Journal said in the article I cited before, they said that in order to even get this regional coalition to work for Israel and for the United States, again, against Ansar Allah, they would have to make compromises with the Palestinians. Basically, essentially, and what probably is so, stop the genocide. So is Ansar Allah right now taking on the role, and maybe as a kind of a surprise role, of doing what the entire axis of resistance has been trying to do, which is stop this genocide and stop the war, and are now even getting people at very high levels of decision making and also narrative making thinking about this?
Well, I disagree with Ambassador Pincus, and I'll tell you why. Saudi Arabia has already initiated military strikes from their territory in the Houthi, including some land incursions. What compromises has Israel had to make to get Saudi Arabia to do that? The United Arab Emirates has continued to be involved in the south and looking to bring more troops in. What compromises did they have to make? I don't know where Pincus is coming from. I think, the Saudis view the Houthi as a problem, and they've been willing to fight them. They don't need Israel to tell them to fight them, and the Saudis are smart enough to know that if you jump in on, a situation where you have other powers doing the heavy lifting for you, it reduces the amount of effort you have to exert, and that's what's happened here. What compromises? Has Saudi Arabia turned around and said, before we continue to fire artillery into Yemeni territory, we need you to stop the genocide? There hasn't even been that conversation. So I don't think the Houthi are, this surprise element. I tragically think unless and it's not impossible, but unless the axis of resistance can revive itself in a different way, because it's going to be different kinds of pressure. But for instance, later this month, the ceasefire expires and Israel hasn't complied with it. Israel continues to occupy big chunks of southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah says that they will immediately begin resisting Israel's occupation. And even though Lebanon has a new president, General Aoun, the Christian, he in the past has spoken about the need to defend Lebanese sovereignty. So I don't think there's going to be pushback from much of Lebanon against any effort by Hezbollah to kick Israel out of territory Israel's illegally occupying. That's going to put pressure on Israel. We don't know, ultimately we don't know which way Iran's going to go. I have assessed, and I continue to believe that Iran is going to pick a path of negotiation with the West. But we can't pretend that, look, they just ran a major exercise, and the purpose of that exercise is to prepare them for war. And so there's a big element within Iran that not only is saying we must be prepared to defend ourselves, but if they, if Israel and the United States continues to, blow their horn, say we're going to attack, Iran may preempt that attack and strike first. And I think there's enough sentiment in Iran that if they feel like they're going to be attacked, then there's no sense in holding out for negotiations. You might as well get the first punch in first. So, and that would be devastating for Israel. So I think the Houthi are holding out to see what's going to happen. They are stubborn. They are morally committed to this fight. You have to give them that. They have linked, their terms are simple. Stop the genocide, get the humanitarian equipment in, and we stop doing what we're doing. And you got to admire them for that.
Scott, one of the most shocking parts about this is, as we watched Syria fall and as we watched that ceasefire that you just described come into place relatively around the same time period, there was, of course, a lot of pessimism about the axis of resistance. And then it seemed like immediately Ansarallah said, no, actually, we're just going to increase and escalate our moves against Israel to show what it seems like it's to show. They're effective strikes in a lot of ways. They're hitting. They say they're hitting their targets. Israelis in the thousands upon thousands are running to bomb shelters. And you have major media publications talking about how do you even address this problem. Scott, how is Ansarallah able to do this? I was reading up on the Palestine 2, and their hypersonic missile has the ability to hit Israel in 11 minutes. I think that's something like over 2,000 kilometers. How are they able to do this, given that Yemen, as you mentioned, has been decimated by endless war, Saudi Arabia, UAE, US, UK, bombing campaigns, military incursions, humanitarian catastrophe that rivals what we've seen in Gaza in terms of hunger and all kinds of other maladies? How are they able to do this?
Well, I think, first of all, Yemen remains one of the most least understood of the Gulf Arab countries. When I was involved with Iraq, there was a tendency amongst the ill-informed to denigrate Iraqis as, ignorant, camel jockeys, other slurs of that nature. But the Iraqis that I met were some of the most highly educated people in the world, people who received their advanced degrees in England and in Europe, in the United States. One of the guys that I interacted with was a nuclear physicist who got his PhD in the University of Michigan, and he just loved to sit down and talk about, the Wolverines. My point is they're very, very good. And when we investigated at one point in time that the Iraqis had, or that the Yemenis had provided the Iraqis with an SS-21 missile. The Iraqis had never received that from the Russians, and the Iraqis were looking at reverse engineering. And the Yemenis provided it, and the Yemenis brought over some people. And the Iraqis talked about the Yemenis as being highly proficient, very capable, professionals. and I think that sometimes that's what's missing here. The Yemeni are just as well educated. They have their scientists, their engineers are people who got their advanced degrees in the West. Um, these are peer level professionals, but we don't give them that credit. That's why we ask the question: well, how can they do this? They're just a bunch of camel jockeys that have curved swords and sandals. How in God's name can they do this? Well, they can do it because they have some extraordinarily capable people. It's a big country with a lot of resources. I have to tell you that to make a solid rocket propellant production facility, it required. Look, both Egypt and Iraq had to bring in the Germans to do it. Um, you know, and both Egypt and Iraq have scientists, advanced scientists and engineers, but they had to bring in a German company to actually make the facility. The Yemeni have done it on their own. And it just shows you that they are far more advanced than we, and far more sophisticated. Of course, yes, there's a tribal element to this. When you look at the fighters in the field, these are tribal fighters, et cetera. But the more you get away from the field and the more you get into the center of government, we're talking about some very sophisticated people with deep understanding of not only what their capabilities are, but what the problems they have are and what the solutions they want to achieve and how to achieve those solutions. And they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, they've been at war now for over a decade. That's all they know. That's every day, every morning they wake up, they're a nation at war, and it's the norm. And you don't survive 10 years at war unless you figure out how to do some things right. So the Yemeni are doing it right, and they're not going to be beat. It's going to be very difficult to inflict pain and suffering enough on them to get them to yield. I just don't see that happening. These, Israel bombed Lebanon, but Lebanon is not a homogeneous state. They bombed Lebanon. Initially, they bombed the southern Shia. And the rest of Lebanon was like, well, that's just the Shia and that's Hezbollah. But then when Israel turned up the heat and started bombing Sunnis and some Christian areas, now you saw everybody saying, hey, stop, Hezbollah, you got to stop doing what you're doing. There's no breaks like that in Yemeni in the social fabric, that you can't divide and conquer these people. When you bomb them, they all feel the bombing. It just makes them want to resist even more. Very, very tough people. And I just think we're wrong to pick the military solution. Israel could solve this problem immediately just by saying we're going to let humanitarian goods into, and Israel doesn't even have to concede any of the other things that they're doing. Simply just open up and let the humanitarian. But Israel's beyond doing the right thing right now. Israel's at the point where they are treating the Gazans as human animals, wild animals that have to be hunted down, exterminated. And if you're hunting down, exterminating wild animals, why would you bring in bags of dog food to feed them?
Yeah. And as you said, Ansar Allah, the Houthis, Yemenis in general, because they're very popular, especially in this key region, where essentially they control the Red Sea and they control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They control this whole coastal region, which Israel and the United States and the UK, they think they can bomb their way out of this, but it's not working, to say the least. And earlier I said over the last several years, the US and UK struck Yemen 700 times. Actually, that's just in the last year. So I need to correct myself on that. But yet they've only gotten stronger. Scott, talk about, because in my opinion, while Israel is, as you said, not stopping this genocide, they're not relinquishing. But at the same time, even with the reprieve that they've been extended through the fall of Syria, it seems like this long war, this war, what seems to be just this endless, forever war that it's gotten itself in on all of these fronts, that seems to be expanding as well as it continues this onslaught. Earlier on this program, before the fall of Syria, we talked about Israel being militarily defeated. In many ways, I still see this because Yemen is able to pierce the Iron Dome. Israel is thinking really hard about Iran still, and we're going to talk a lot more about Iran today. Still thinking really hard. Oh, do we strike Yemen? Do we strike Iran? How can we actually defeat them? It seems to me that there's still a lot of trouble, and then you have Hezbollah waiting in the wings as this ceasefire is set to expire. What do you think about this position of Israel being militarily defeated? Because in many respects, it seems that while it's able to continue its onslaught and expand, it seems like into no person's land, like what it did in Syria, it's moving along these forever wars with no real seemingly achievable objectives in sight.
Well, again, we have to go back to the ceasefire that was signed or entered into in November that brought an end to the fighting in southern Lebanon, northern Israel. The Israelis are the ones that sued for the ceasefire, pushed for the ceasefire. Why? Because when they sent two of their best brigades, the 7th Armored Brigade and the Golani Brigade, into southern Lebanon, they got beat by Hezbollah on the ground. They were unable to achieve their objectives. They had to retreat under fire, and they took casualties. And right about that time, the Israeli command realized that our military is broken. You know, we've been fighting over a year, and we're just worn out morally, physically, materially. You know, our equipment hasn't been maintained properly, and the troops are just losing the will to fight. And that's why they opted for this ceasefire. They pushed for it. And Hezbollah accepted because Hezbollah is under a lot of pressure. I mean, even though the Israelis weren't doing so good on the ground, you know, they had inflicted some harm on Hezbollah through the air. The murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the decapitation of much of the leadership below him, the pagers that gutted the mid-level management of Hezbollah, and then some. Apparently, the Israelis had people on the inside of Hezbollah who were feeding back targeting information, and the Israelis were hitting some very valuable targets and doing harm. So, you know, Hezbollah didn't make the offer for the ceasefire, but when it was presented to them, they were placed under pressure by the Lebanese government to accept it. So Hezbollah did accept it, but Hezbollah wasn't defeated. That's the point we have to make. All Israel did is get a ceasefire, and then, you know, Assad fell, and so we have the perception of Israeli strength now because they're punching into basically an empty bag. They took over a significant part of the Syrian Golan Heights, but there was no resistance. They moved up along Mount Hermon, along the border with Lebanon, to be 20 kilometers from no resistance. They've moved into the south, no resistance. So it looks good on the map. You get a lot of flags flying, but there's no resistance. This isn't southern Lebanon where, you know, they tried to take certain villages and they were getting, you know, beat back. It's still a tired army. It's still an overextended army. It's still an army taking casualties in Gaza every day. You know, our headlines are dominated, to the extent that we cover Gaza anymore, are dominated by, you know, the murder, ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, targeting hospitals, refugee camps, humanitarian convoys, and just women and children being killed by the score every day. You know, that's happening, but at the same time, you know, every day, 1, 2, 3 Israeli soldiers killed, others wounded. A never ending. They're not at peace there. They may have leveled this entire place, but and if the latest reporting is accurate, Hezbollah has actually recruited like 12,000 fighters in the last several months.
I think it was Hamas. Actually, I think you're talking about.
I'm sorry, you're right. Hamas had recruited.
Right. Yeah. Hezbollah is pretty big. I mean, Hezbollah is really big. But
no, I'm talking about Hamas.
Yes,
Hamas
yes.
Recruited, thousands, tens of thousands of fighters, and they may actually have more fighters today than they did when the conflict started. Level of training unknown, probably not as good, but hey, if you're supposed to be physically defeating your enemy, and your enemy's still resisting, killing people, and they're getting bigger, yeah, it sends a number of red flags. For instance, if you have a humanitarian disaster amongst the civilians, how is Hamas continuing to supply tens of thousands of fighters? Where is their supply chain coming from? I think Hamas has more resources and capabilities than and are able to reconstitute. Sinwar was obviously in a difficult position near the end. They say he hadn't eaten for, I think, 4 days leading up to that, and so maybe they had a situational, uh, reality in one localized area where Sinwar was. That's what drove him out of the tunnels to be fighting. But Hamas has the ability to, first of all, the Israelis, they're like what we did in Vietnam. I mean, Gaza has in many ways become their Vietnam. Anybody who, if I say the Ashau Valley, how many times did we launch attacks across the Ashau Valley? To seize Hill 861, or the long train Byangpu line along the River Chi. I'm making all this stuff up, but and then you achieve it. Soldiers are dead, and then you fall back, and then the Viet Cong come right back in. The NVA come in, dig in, and next thing you know, you're launching the attack again. That's happening to the Israelis. They come in and they secure a place, but you can't stay there. They've blown everything up. There's nothing. So you run around, you do what you have to do, and then you leave, and Hamas comes right back, and you have to fight. And the Israelis are now fighting for the same terrain, for the fourth or fifth time. That's demoralizing the extreme. So the Israelis aren't in, and remember, their economy hasn't recovered. It's not as though the Israeli economy, the southern port of Eilat is still shut down because of the Houthi. So the idea that Israel wants to drag this thing out. Now you have some Israelis talking about, attacking Iran. It's conceivable that Israel would overextend itself and achieve the Palestinian victory for the Palestinians, meaning that the Israelis defeat themselves. I don't think Trump is going to let that happen. I think that the Trump administration is going to try and bring about an end to the fighting, one way or the other. I don't know how they're going to do that. Hamas, they promised to, blow them to hell even more than they've already been blown. I don't know how that works, but look, there's some interesting politics going on between Trump and Netanyahu right now. The idea that the United States is going to rubber stamp Israel's wants and desires apparently isn't the case at all. And Trump, he showed a clip from, I guess, David Sachs being interviewed.
Jeffrey Sachs, I think. Jeffrey Sachs, right.
And he blames Israel, Netanyahu personally, for starting the Syrian conflict, the Iraq conflict, and wanting to get him involved. And this, Trump put this out. So Netanyahu now is not coming to the inauguration. There's some bad blood there. I think, that the Trump administration does believe that they're going to bring it into this war, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they back Israel 100%. They want this war brought to closure. I don't think they want to get involved in attacking Iran, because that would just take them to the opposite trajectory. I think they have some tough problems with the Houthi. And I think they'll be looking for some sort of compromise situation, maybe a resurrection of the wording of the Abrams Accord, which gives lip service to a Palestinian state without providing any roadmap. But the Israelis aren't as strong as they are making themselves out to be. I originally thought that Trump was going to come in because of the nature of his cabinet, and that Trump was just going to rubber stamp everything the Israelis want, and that would make them virtually unstoppable. But the tea leaves now seem to show that Trump wants to bring all this fighting to an end soon so that the United States can unplug, and that he doesn't trust Netanyahu, and therefore he's not going to do whatever Netanyahu he blames for getting the United States in wars. And he personally understands the lobbying power and prowess of Netanyahu. Why do you think we withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, back in 2018? Because Netanyahu personally lobbied Donald Trump. So I think he's fully aware of who Netanyahu is and what he is and how he does things. it's an interesting dynamic right now. We don't know. We have to wait 10 more days till he's sworn in to see what he's going to do. But in the meantime, the one thing that we can say is that there are things happening in Trump land that weren't on anybody's bingo card. And Trump alienated Netanyahu, whose bingo card was that on? Who said, oh yeah, that's what's going to happen. So there's just some strange dynamics taking place right now that affect how you assess, the situation going forward. That's my intellectual get out of jail free card there. So I can say, well, I told you there were some strange dynamics at play, but there are. It does make doing predictive analysis difficult.
Yeah, surely it's hard to predict. I think what makes it so difficult, Scott, right now is we've been talking about all these dynamics surrounding West Asia, Israel's continued. It seems like it's trying to spread whatever tentacles it has, backed by the United States, just everywhere it can. It's trying to take all of Palestine. It's trying to fend off every single and what it claims is destroyed. I mean, it's warning, right? You had the UN ambassador warning Ansar Allah, we are going to give you the Hamas and Hezbollah treatment. Meanwhile, Hamas, for however Syria's loss is going to affect them, they are still fighting very hard. And that report that you cited about Hamas's numbers, in the article in Jerusalem Post, it literally says that the numbers that Israel is putting out there is essentially a 1-to-1 ratio, where the amount of Hamas fighters they supposedly have eliminated equal the number of Hamas fighters, or are less than the number of Hamas fighters that are left, which they think makes no sense. But what it seems like has happened is that, of course, resistance has grown in Gaza for obvious reasons. But with Trump, even, Trump 1.0, the first Trump administration, it was, it was an Israeli rubber stamp, right? But we are in a different situation. Israel is unhinged, out of control, and really at risk of creating huge problems. They're even talking about Turkey versus Israel. Oh, there was a panel. Maybe a war with Turkey is more valuable than a war with Iran right now. It's this kind of unhinged, what seems to me still desperation. They think that they're riding a wave, but it seems like it's almost like they're thinking they're on borrowed time or something. They've got to go now because this is the opportunity to cement and solidify their existence for good. But that's not going to work for the United States, because the United States wants to project power in the Middle East. It wants, obviously, to occupy and to have a presence and dominate it. But what the model that the United States has employed, that so well, Scott, has been these endless wars, which have actually backfired and done the opposite. Your thoughts?
See, I do believe that Trump is seeking to break the paradigm that currently exists in the Middle East. I don't think he's seeking to occupy and remain. He's indicated in the past and hinted at it today that he wants out of Syria, that he wants the American troops that are in Syria to be out of Syria. And I think he will, look to make a deal with the Kurds, with the Turks, with the, whatever we're calling the Syrian government, the Iranians, to bring an end to the fighting in the vicinity of, I guess it's northeastern Syria, so he can withdraw, and he wants out of Iraq as well, and. So I don't see him just coming in and rubber stamping the same policies of the past. I actually think that Trump is looking to undertake some bold initiatives to bring an end to the fighting, and some of these bold initiatives may not be what the Israelis would prefer. But again, I mean, Trump also could take advantage. If the Israelis are willing or indicate that their number one priority now should be to prepare for the return of the Turks of Ottoman Empire, and that it's more important to prepare for that than it is for the Iran project, which they've been undergoing now for decades, trying to bring down the theocracy. You could be in a situation where the Israeli inclination is towards a negotiated resolution of the Iranian issue to keep the Iranian government that's there today in play, because then to play them off against the Turks and to use, make the Iranians sort of a de facto ally in the containment of a new Ottoman Empire. So there's just a lot of interesting dynamics taking place today that that make it. I don't think that we can fall back on whatever models that existed prior to during the Biden administration, the diplomatic model, et cetera. I think Trump wants to come in and just throw all that away and start all over to get America out of there. I don't see Trump wanting to maintain this occupation of the Middle East. I think he's looking to be totally withdrawn from the region to the largest extent possible, so that the United States can stop trying to lead with the military and start leading economically. He wants to get in a economic competition with the Chinese, not a military competition.
Yeah, and the big question for me is, will some people call it the deep state, I just call it the real state, will the powers that be that will be surrounding Trump, not just the cabinet, we make a lot about the cabinet because they're open figures, but the people that we don't see and those who exert incredible influence over foreign policy, the military industrial complex, these forces, will they allow Donald Trump? Because we saw that in the first Trump administration, especially around Syria, Afghanistan, there was so much pushback. And then the beginning of the Biden administration, boom, the U.S. suffered a massive defeat in Afghanistan. So we will have to see about this. But one thing I wanted to say to what you were saying, Scott, was that the conditions are different in the sense that while Israel may be looking with its chest pumped out, the situation in the Middle East is actually incredibly dire. And it feels to me that the more Israel continues its onslaught and tries to extend into more and more of these wars, the more that this has the potential of backfiring on the United States. And the United States hasn't really been in that position, really, ever with Israel. Like, it hasn't been in the position where something that Israel is doing actually is threatening the further ability for the U.S. not only to be this kind of world police force, to be this example of what it means. And Donald Trump doesn't want that, but there are so many who want to continue in the real state, the deep state, this idea of the U.S. as a world police force.
Yeah, I mean, we can learn something. I think Trump has indicated that he did learn something from his first administration. First of all, when you're part of a revolutionary movement like MAGA is, you don't have backing in the establishment. It's not like there are MAGA professors that have insinuated their way into mainstream academia. You don't have a MAGA party in Congress. You don't. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things. You're sort of on your own, and even though he has an R next to his name, when a Republican, it's difficult when much of the Republican Party was against him back in his first term, and there's even some holdouts to this day that aren't supporting him. But I do think that he has surrounded himself with enough outliers that they don't have the hidden umbilical cord to the establishment, and so I think that there will be a concerted effort to bring about the kind of change that Trump has threatened to do, and the establishment doesn't want him to do. But I do think that we'll have to be on guard. When I say Trump will have to be on guard for the hidden agents, the stay behind agents. There was an interesting article written by the former deputy national security advisor to Trump, who, when he found out that Trump was going to keep the National Security Council about the same size, and was going to allow up to in some cases 2/3, but at least 1/3 of the current staffing to stay in. He said, no, these people have been politicized. They work for Team Biden, and they're not going to be able to take off the hat, so they will stay behind to sabotage Trump. And I think that's one of the things that Trump has to watch out for. is the sabotage of his efforts that will come from within, not in a direct fashion where you can say, "Aha, that's the establishment." It'll come from inside the team that he's building, that he feels is on his side. I think he has to guard for the ability of the establishment to infiltrate and do their best to control what Trump's trying to do and undermine it where they don't want it to succeed.
Well, I hope you're right, Scott. I've always been suspicious of not just Donald Trump. I know you've been very critical of Donald Trump as well. But even the movement behind it, while I am all for the anti-interventionism, I'm truly hoping that, in what I see as the conditions on the ground as being a huge impetus for possibly leading to, I think, a big conflict within the political establishment, because there will be many forces trying to do more of the same, and there will be pressure on a Trump administration to, at the very least, save face from what is, if Donald Trump goes through 4 years, if he gets there, of a genocide in Gaza and Ukraine. We can get to that later, but Ukraine, if that doesn't resolve itself in some way beneficial to the United States, there will be a lot of trouble politically here. So, one thing though, Scott, I wanted to talk to you about was these drills that you mentioned that Iran has been taking part in. So Israeli media has been framing these drills as almost an emergency act to prepare for war with Israel. Now, these drills occur every single year, but Israeli media is saying that they've doubled in size, and they're focusing a lot on what they're saying are nuclear sites, because Israel has a dream of bombing their nuclear sites. But the spokesperson for the IRGC, Ali Mohammed Naini, in talking about the Great Prophet, that's what it's translated into with these drills, he talked about how, and he directly cited enemies, and he said, Iran has been fully prepared since long ago for big and complicated battles on any scale. The enemy knows the skies of the occupied territories are clear and defenseless for us. We can act against Israel with greater magnitude, speed, accuracy, and the production of our weapons and missiles continues to advance daily. They've also unleashed some incredible technology during these drills, Scott. These like floating missiles, these missile cities, these underground missile technological hubs, where they can essentially not only protect Iran but launch basically at will. And I'm just curious, Scott, your thoughts about this. Iran is saying they're ready for war. Many people have said, well, Iran is weak. They're not taking a strong enough stance. They didn't do Operation True Promise 3. But these drills have demonstrated pretty impressive military capabilities. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, the spokesperson for the RGC is 100% correct. When the United States invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein, the Iranians believed that they were going to be next in line, that the United States was going to eventually target them for a massive military assault designed to physically occupy Iran and eliminate the government. And so what the Iranians did is they broke Iran down into military districts. And the concept of each military district is that it could stand by itself. It didn't have to communicate with the center, didn't have to coordinate with anybody else. And it wasn't just about defending their territory, but each one of these districts retained offensive strike capability that would allow them to attack, the enemies of Iran. Again, even if they have no communication with Tehran, they can do this on their own. And they created these autonomous defense districts. They still exist. They're still there. And what all the Iranians are doing is giving them more advanced tools to defend Iran from any potential attacker. But the idea that Iran is only now waking up to the threat posed by Israel and the United States is wrong. Iran's been preparing for this since 2003 at the very least, when the United States invaded Iraq. And I think that we again, war is an extension of politics by other means, though, and this great prophet exercise is just a demonstration of military capability, and it's done for propaganda purposes. I mean, if Iran was really intent on doing harm, many of these military capabilities have already been tested, proven. There's been minor exercises to validate procedures, but there's no reason to do a great giant exercise with lots of media attention that's showing the new weapons and showing it. You're doing that not just for domestic consumption, but you're doing that for the world to see. It's part of the deterrence posture of the Iranians. And the purpose of deterrence is to avoid an attack. I don't think the Iranians are looking for a war with Israel. I think Iran would prefer that the situation in Gaza get resolved without Israel and Iran having to go to war. Iran supported Hezbollah and will, indicates that it will continue to support Hezbollah in Hezbollah's resistance actions. But Iran is definitely right now not looking for a fight. That's the words that were spoken apparently by the Iranian foreign minister to the Turkish foreign minister. The Turkish foreign minister relayed the substance of this conversation. But we also appear to see, indications from the presidency that Iran is ready to enter into serious negotiations with the United States about Iran and its nuclear program, etc. These are all indicators that Iran is looking for an off-ramp, not Iran is itching for a fight.
Yeah, even the RGC spokesperson said they're not wanting to start a war with Israel, that they're ready for war with Israel. Scott, could you go over some of these weapons that have been demonstrated by Iran? The missile and drone cities include a missile storage facility in a southern Iran-based complex designed for naval vessels. And of course, there's also a demonstration of naval power by Iran in these drills. Could you talk about what these weapons are and what they mean? Because we know that Israel and the United States, even a large chunk of it, in the establishment, the foreign policy establishment, have been itching for a war with Iran. How do these capabilities that Iran are demonstrating actually exercise or provide a deterrence factor, given that Israel has struck Iran and they claim that they destroyed all of its air defenses? What do you make of these capabilities Iran is showing?
Well, first of all, I can't claim to have familiarity with the missile city in the south and its Navy, so I won't talk on that because I just be making stuff up, and I don't do that. So I have to acknowledge that I haven't read into that. I've been focusing on a lot of the air defense. Iran has been showing, very modern air defense capabilities, and they've been trying to push back against the notion that Israel somehow penetrated Iran's air defense back in, was it October? And destroyed some capabilities, and that Iran is shivering in fear over Israel's ability to penetrate its air defense. And so Iran's made 2 points. One, that you can't penetrate our air defense. Or you didn't. Iran claims they didn't, and that we have even better air defense now than before. And then two, that it's Iran that can continue to penetrate the Iron Dome at will. Iran has, advanced ballistic missile capability, hypersonic missile capability, etc. On the conventional side, I was really impressed with one demonstration, or at least discussion of a demonstration. That was the ability to do a mass drone launch that incorporates AI in the targeting, meaning that the drones will launch and then communicate amongst themselves, pick targets, discriminate targets, and then attack the targets. Independent of GPS guidance and things of that nature. This is something that Russia was working on with the Lancet missile. An advanced version of the Lancet was supposed to be able to do that. But as far as I know, Russia hasn't actually fielded that capability, definitely not using it on the battlefield yet. Iran, however, has demonstrated that it it's ready now. It has it now. That would imply that they're even more advanced than Russia on this capability. That they are definitely looking at the modern battlefield. I know when we did the Iran war plans back in the 1980s, we the Iranian military wasn't even considered to be near peer. Technologically, our military was far more advanced, and we just felt that we would cut through them like a hot knife through butter. That's no longer the case. The Iranian military today is extremely capable, professional, with the best equipment out there. And anybody who thinks that Iran's going to go down easy is wrong. And I think that's the purpose of this exercise. This exercise serves as a demonstration of deterrence.
Yeah, and perhaps to close on the Middle East, Scott, you mentioned Hezbollah before and its ability to withstand these hits, and essentially during that attempted ground invasion, repel Israel's attempts to invade. And we've been hearing, of course, Hezbollah is defeated, Hamas is defeated, Iran is defeated from the Israeli side and the US side a lot. But I wanted to show you something that I found from the Washington Institute, which is an incredibly neocon think tank. I mean, we're talking about people like Joe Lieberman, the Hoover Institute. We can go on and on and on about who supports the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. They're all, many of them, architects of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. But this article here is very interesting. And then it talks about, don't assume Iran's supply lines to Hezbollah are cut. And it proposes these 4 possibilities that may continue to provide an outlet to Hezbollah. Continued overload truck transport through Iraq, across central Syria into Lebanon. So Syria, even though Assad is gone, perhaps still providing that. Other overland routes, Iraq, Jordan, southern Syria, or Iraq, Turkey in northern Syria. Maritime transport to Syria's Mediterranean coast, truck transport to Lebanon, and then air transport into Syria, truck transport into Lebanon. What's so interesting about this, Scott, is that, when one thing that some have pointed out is that Syria is about to enter into a big period of chaos. It's going to be incredibly difficult to govern Syria with all of these various factions doing what they do, and they're doing it now, in terms of these gross, just absolutely obscene violations of human rights and just disgusting treatment of ethnic minorities in Syria and religious minorities like the Alawites. But even the Washington Institute is conceding, or maybe this is propaganda, that Hezbollah might not essentially be cut off just yet. What do you make of this? And do you see that the fighting between Hezbollah and Israel continuing after the ceasefire expires?
Well, first of all, I do think that there's going to be fighting after the ceasefire expires. Hezbollah has made it part of their core reason to exist. The eviction of Israeli occupiers from the soil of Lebanon. That's what gives them legitimacy, inside Lebanon. That's why the Lebanese army hasn't, demanded their, demobilization. It's because they have a legitimate resistance mission against Israeli occupiers. And a lot of people may not know, but the Shebaa Farms region is, Hezbollah and Lebanon consider that to be Lebanese territory. The Israelis say, no, it's Syrian territory. Therefore, we're not occupying Lebanon, and therefore Hezbollah is illegitimate. But from the Hezbollah perspective, and more importantly, from the Lebanese government perspective, the Shebaa Farms are definitely Lebanese soil. Therefore, that gives legitimacy to everything that Hezbollah does. But now we have even more territory that's been occupied by the Israelis. So this is just literally the easiest case in the world to make for, continued resistance against Israel. and I'll leave it. I actually just lost track of where I was. I got bogged down. If you want to restate the question, I can reapproach it.
Oh, no worries. No, I was, the Washington Institute is promoting these
Okay, no,
ideas,
now I'm back. Now I'm
the
back.
resupply routes of
Yeah,
Hezbollah.
I had done the whole answer on the analyzing the 4 routes, and then I got caught into talking about Hezbollah resisting, and I wasn't able to get back. But now I'm back. It's a danger of getting old. The interesting thing about these 4 routes, first of all, Israel has been in the business of interdicting Iranian shipments to Hezbollah for some time now, and they weren't able to, fully achieve that. But they have a very good idea about how the material comes in and in what form it comes in. Remember, it's not just the monitoring that's taking place, but apparently we now know that Israel had people on the inside of Hezbollah and giving away some very, very sophisticated information. One of the things they gave away was a underground missile production facility inside Syria that was being done as part of this program, meaning that the weapons would be built in Syria and then shipped to Lebanon. And the Israeli air commandos launched put 120 guys on the ground and went in there and blew the place up. So they have good intelligence that way. The interesting thing about the factories is that I think that allows Hezbollah to build the basic building blocks of these weapon systems locally. Therefore, all they would need to get is the various components, the chemicals, etc. But the factory's there. What they can't produce are the precision guided, the guidance systems, the sensitive electronics, etc. The server motors on the ailerons. And so what the Iranians would do is provide kits. And the important thing about the kits here, if you want to evaluate these 4 lines, we can't be thinking about the Iranians putting completed missiles on the back of a truck or, dismantled missiles on the back of the truck. That's how they did it early on to get some of the weapons in. But now they have the factories that are producing the big components. So what Iran is bringing in are the very sophisticated components that it's difficult to have a factory of that in Lebanon or Hezbollah for put a factory together for that. So Iran is supplying those kits. And where the Washington Institute might have a point is you can smuggle kits. I mean, I can put kits in a box, throw them on the back of a mule, and smuggle it the same way that they've been smuggling heroin for decades now. We know that the borders in these areas are porous, that smugglers, make a living on a daily basis transporting things back and forth. And so it is conceivable that Hezbollah has negotiated several rat lines, smuggler lines to get not complete weapons, but the sophisticated components in there. And if Hezbollah was able to retain some sort of manufacturing capability, that Hezbollah would be able to rearm and re-equip itself with some Iranian input. So, but the large scale resupply, large shipments of ammunition and all that, that's much more difficult to do. And one of those is unrealistic. I don't know what the date of that article was, but Israel's made it clear that any Iranian aircraft that tries to land on Syrian soil will be shot down. So the idea of the Iranians running covert midnight flights, landing with lights out condition in the desert, no.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this too, from a political perspective, and just looking at that, the landscape right now, especially after the fall of Syria, is that with Turkey and Israel, which these are governments that don't have necessarily a lot of popularity, let's say, in in the particular areas that the Washington Institute was talking about, right? Where there's a huge possibility that Turkey's expansion into Syria will be very unpopular with a lot of people in Syria. there's already it's almost a guarantee that what Israel is doing in Syria, given that Israel has been doing it for a long time in Syria, occupying large parts of its land, is unpopular. So that leads to these. Even though when I was looking at that list, I was like, wait, a lot of these governments, a lot of these states are hostile to the idea of the resistance, but it seems to me that there might be, as you said, with smuggling and these kind of rat lines, and fueled by both chaos and political feelings and ill feelings toward those forces that Hezbollah and similar resistance groups are waging resistance against. That leads to opportunities for the possibility for a resumption or a reloading toward a resumption of this, what seems to be and what's going to be a long war, a long resistance war with Israel, and of course the United States backing it.
I mean, if the resistance is able to, if the Axis resistance is able to reconstitute, some meaningful supply line, I think Hezbollah has the not only the means but the legitimate justification for continuing to resist Israel. And you're right about the long war. I just want to make a comment about the long war. As time has passed since the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime, both Russian and Iranian sources have, gone and talked to the people on the ground to say, hey, what happened? How did this happen? And two components jump out, and they're related. One is governments that have been in place for a long time, and the other one is economic sanctions or something that strangles, the economy. Governments have been for a long time, even under the best of conditions. I mean, just think about it. Democracies, if you have a great guy, let's say there were no term limits, there's not too many presidents that I think would last more than 3 terms. Even if they're widely popular, by the end of the 3rd term, people are like, we need a change. We need something to go, to change here. So when you have these autocracies that govern forever, there's already within the system, I think, a natural inclination towards change. So you already have people under the best of conditions are saying, maybe it's time for them to go. Maybe we need to do something to get rid of them. Then you pile onto that economic sanctions or, suppressed economic activity. And now you have people rising up saying, not, it would be nice to have change, saying we must have change. And they eat this, the combination of that, I think, eats the heart of the country involved, the government involved, so that in the end, it's just this, framework, shallow framework with veneer on it. It's not substantive. And that's what happened in Syria. It's just that the Syrian government lost the faith of these, the people lost faith with their government. The government lost the ability to rule because of the combination of a long time not changing patterns, and then sanctions, and of course the fighting that wore things down. You just had this hollow shell. Why I bring that up is there's not a government in the region that doesn't fit that definition. Erdogan's been in since early 2000s. Economic problems. You could bring Erdogan down just by squeezing the economy. That's right. One theory that exists in the CIA. Iran, the Iranians themselves. I mean, I remember Raisi said back in September 23 that because of the unrest that took place after the death of that Kurdish girl over a violation of hijab, it was actually a insurrection that was mounted by foreign powers to try and bring down the government. The government survived, but Iran is one of those places where you have a government that's been in power for a long time. There's a an inherent desire for change. And if the government doesn't deliver on the promise of better economic conditions, it becomes a framework, a veneer, a
Yes.
collapse. You know who else fits this description? Israel. So everybody's talking about how, how immortal Israel is, greater Israel is going to live forever. Netanyahu, in one form or another, has been in power since the mid 1990s. He has built a system that is not flexible, doesn't bring about change, and there's a growing group of Israelis who want this change. And then you look at the economic state of affairs for Israel, and so
Sure.
there's we can sit here and talk about the potential of conflict, long wars, but understand this: almost every nation in the region is susceptible to the same collapse syndrome
Right.
that happened in Syria. So I don't think continuing these policies that bring about chaos and anarchy is conducive to longevity of any of the governments of the Middle East.
Which then makes it very interesting, Scott, because we've been making the point here on this show that Iran has a lot of justifications for not escalating with Israel as much as possible because Iran is under these very harsh sanctions, yet is, we have to say, despite its economic problems, one of the most stable economies in the region, despite its want and its relative impoverishment because it's been cut off from much of the world economy. We don't necessarily hear, oh, what's that economic crash doing in Iran every so many years. It's because there's obviously been efforts internally in Iran to stabilize things, to survive the sanctions. It's built up. You've talked about Iran's military capabilities as also an economic policy. And then on the, and with that point, Iran saw what happened in Syria. I mean, Syria, the sanctions just absolutely decimated the economy. Everybody was impoverished. Everyone was in extreme poverty, and it was being bombed all of the time. And it had basically, the sanctions came after. I've been making this point, Scott. The sanctions came after just one of the most devastating, dirty wars that we had seen, short of a Libya style or an Iraq style military incursion. They were unable to repair that society. Bashar al-Assad could do nothing to do. I mean, maybe some people argue, oh, we'll get closer to Russia and China. But sanctions are a very difficult thing, and it can be the breadth of these sanctions extended into the financial system. It was brutal. So I think Iran is looking at this and saying, well, this is why we got to pace ourselves, because if we end up in a situation where we're at full-out war, then we are under threat. But guess what? The entire region's resistance can't afford us to be in a state of imminent collapse. So I see. And then when you made the point about Israel, I think that's a very good point, because Israel's a colony. Israel, similar to South Africa, it seems like its date has come. Like it's like overdue for massive change and transformation. And it is right now committing a genocide, which nobody in the world likes and wants to see, if you have any humanity at all. And you said, oh well, these like chaos, these wars going on forever, just all these governments won't benefit from it. Well, Israel is literally saying to the world, oh no, we're going to just forever benefit from being at war, from committing genocide, up until no end. There's no date. There's no, well, we're going to achieve this and that will end it. No. In my opinion, every time Israel talks about Hamas, despite the resistances, what I think is a heroic resistance by Hamas, a lot of times I'm just thinking, I think Israel is just talking about civilians. They're just talking about killing civilians, and they're just Hamas. Like, well, we've killed all these civilians. Why is Hamas still here? Well, because one, you're not really fighting Hamas the way you say you are. You're actually just killing civilians.
Yeah, I mean, was old Mao Zedong, just a low intensity conflict about, hearts and minds. American troops were briefed all the time in Afghanistan. If you go into a village and you kill, you know, um, five innocent civilians, you've probably now created, 50 new insurgents from the neighborhood who are going to, react to what you've done. And that's sort of what's happening to Israel. Their genocide is not just empowering the people, of Hamas and Gaza, but it's alienating the world. It's having the opposite effect.
Yeah, and I want to just say one more point before we move on. The one government that fits this description that's not in the region is China, and I think you could say Russia as well. But China has had same party, same system for 70 plus years. And one of the things that it has done, which I think Iran and other or Syria, I believe, genuinely want to do this, couldn't. Iran definitely wants to do this. It is build an economy that can improve the conditions of people. Because when you do that, well, then these things that are happening around you, like US sanctions and war threats and attempts to get you to provoke you into a war a la Ukraine, those things don't have the same kind of impact like they did with Syria, which, Israel from what is it, ever since it occupied the Golan Heights, maybe before that, has wanted to take over Syria. And the US has wanted to overthrow Syria's government from even before 2011. And so all of those pressures, I think, there was in this period when Syria was under this just absolute distress. I think a lot of people actually overlooked the fact that Syria was under so much pressure and assault, especially since October 7th, 2023, when Hamas and the resistance took the gamble on essentially provoking Israel into a genocide in order to destroy Israel's ongoing, colonial project. It seems to me that a lot of people did ignore what was happening to Syria because we were all just like, Syria is good. They at least defeated the dirty war, but there was obviously things still going on that just left it vulnerable when the moment came.
One of the interesting things about Syria is, and again, as a possible indicator of the fragility of the government of Bashar al-Assad, is during all this time, even before October 7th, Israel was bombing Syria, if not on a daily basis, at least several times a week, and bombing downtown Damascus, bombing the Damascus airport, bombing, major cities. And Syria would defend itself, but not with tremendous capability. There was two things that came out. One, the Russians never really fully jumped in and sided with Syria and said, Israel, you can't attack anymore. We're not going to allow you to attack. Russia pushed back sometimes diplomatically, but by and large, Russia said, Syria, you're on your own. And Syria couldn't do anything. Syria didn't stop the attack. Syria didn't, what does a nation do normally when they're bombed like that? When you humiliate them, bomb their capital, bomb, the airport and all that, you retaliate, you strike back. Syria never once lifted a finger against Israel for any of these attacks. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why wasn't Syria willing to push back against these flagrant, war crimes being committed against them? And I think the answer is that people were just tired of the fight, tired of defending this regime, that they just quit. It's just an interesting, because there's more that Syria could have done, but but they didn't. You know, it might have invited an escalation of the conflict, but since when does a nation, after being bombed indiscriminately the way Syria was bombed by both by Israel and the United States, just take it? A sovereign state with a powerful military, just take it and don't respond. I think that was another indication that Syria was just rotting from inside, that the military, you know, either wasn't able to defend or just had given up, and it just determined that Syria wasn't worth defending anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we move on to the next topic, Scott, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about an event you have. You have many events you have coming up, a book tour. For some reason, it's not letting me open your link, but to pull it up, there's a little bit of a conspiracy here. Bear with me, everyone. Interesting. So I'm trying to pull up your website, and it's almost as if we have SBU folks working their way on the inside here. How about this, Scott? Talk about this event while I get this up.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. Basically, Clarity Press published a book last year in the early fall called "Covering Ukraine." There it is, and it's a collaboration between myself and Anya Kay, who's I think increasingly well-known podcaster who does a show called Through the Eyes of Anya Kay. And early on in the Ukraine conflict, she began to ask for interviews, and over the course of 2 years, we did a large number of interviews. And what we did is we picked the highlights of these interviews and organized them in a way that provided with a chronologically concise and consistent narrative of how this war started, what this war is about, and where this war is going. It's a slim volume. It can be read easily in a day, but it would have to be reread and reread and reread because it's dense with data. But Anya Kay and I collaborated on this, and she lives in Poland, and we decided that we should invite her here to the United States and take her on a little bit of a book tour. She only has a limited amount of time, so we were able to get 3 events. We have an event on January 15th in the Bronx, an Italian restaurant in the Bronx. The January 15th and January 21st events are ticketed events. And one of the reasons is that they're held at restaurants. And so for the price of the ticket, you're getting a very good meal. You're getting a copy of the book. There's a little bit of overhead, not much, but a little bit of overhead to help us pay for Anya's flight and in hotels and travel. But you can go on the skyritter.com and you can purchase the tickets there. The event on the 19th is in Washington, D.C. At Busboys and Poets on their flagship 14th and V venue. And again, a great venue. I'd encourage people to come. There's no tickets, so please come and get a good meal, have a nice beer. I think it's the 19th, I think, is a Saturday night or no, it's a Sunday night, but still, it's an early enough event. You can come there and have a nice dinner, have a beer, and listen to us talk about the books. And the final event on January 21st is in Poughkeepsie at Farmers and Chef Restaurant. I did an event there earlier, a couple years ago, to promote the Disarm at the Time of Perestroika book. John Lakich is the owner and chief chef. He puts together a fantastic menu. The menu's located on the site. And again, come get a great meal, get the book, and listen to Anya and I discuss the issues in Ukraine and how we came about this. One of the interesting things about this is the collaboration, using podcasts as a means to educate and inform, which is near and dear to both of our hearts. So we encourage people, if you can make it, to come out and have a informative, enjoyable night.
Yes. So the video description has scottritter.com, and I believe I have the link to the event section where it goes right to these book events in Poughkeepsie and New York City. And then, of course, you can save the date for the Washington, D.C. event. But Scott, speaking of Ukraine, let's close on this. I wanted to play you. Vladimir Zelensky recently had an interview with Lex Friedman, and I wanted to play you a clip from it that I think you will enjoy sarcastically. Here's what Zelensky had to say about corruption in Ukraine.
Think about, and I care a lot about the future of Ukraine is corruption. This is something you have cared a lot about for a long time. You won the presidency 2019 in big part your message of fighting corruption. But there's a lot of accusations that during war, I mentioned $9 trillion in the United States, war breeds corruption. So can you speak to that, how you have been fighting corruption, and can you respond to the accusations there has been corruption in Ukraine?
It's very simple. First of all, we really have a very sophisticated anti-corruption system. Sophisticated not in the sense that it's difficult to understand, but in that it really consists of many elements. It's the most sophisticated in all of Europe.
So, Scott, Volodymyr Zelensky says, I didn't play anymore because he does not explain how it's the most sophisticated in all of Europe, of course. So I wanted to ask you, what do you make of this in light of the current situation in Ukraine and where all of this is heading?
Well, the most sophisticated anti-corruption system in the world, I think, has the presidency getting a cut of everything and then working their way down. It is sophisticated. Tens of billions of dollars have been skimmed off of the money that's been sent over there and used to enrich people. I mean, all the Ukrainian elite who are no longer in power have left the country and are doing very well. The most sophisticated anti-corruption system in the world. Ukraine's the most sophisticatedly corrupt place in the world. Corruption is endemic, throughout. And Zelensky is one of the most corrupt. Seymour Hersh, who I have just again tremendous respect for, wrote an article a while back, but he said that the corruption got so bad, Zelensky's corruption got so bad that the United States had to send a general over there, and it might have even been Lloyd Austin, to sit down and say, "Hey, you can't be taken. You got to cap it at this level. You can't take any more than that." I mean, literally just confronting him straight up about the corruption and how it was not done. So we know that he's corrupt, but we continue to feed it. We just sent $500 million more today. Part of a multi-billion-dollar package that we're still trying to shove down the Ukrainian throats before Trump comes into office. A lot of that, doesn't Ukrainian, fingers don't touch it. And Zelensky did mention this in his in subsequent answer. He said, a lot of the money we don't touch. It basically gets reinvested into your defense industry to produce the weapons that we need. And he's right, but a lot of it he does touch. A lot of it is in terms of, cash, money. Anytime you have actual money coming in, but it's not just the money. There's things that can walk away or fall off the back of a truck, including Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, etc., have found their way onto the black market to be sold off, along with small arms, mortars, ammunition. That's taking place. Plus the whole corrupt system. I mean, moving material across, Ukraine goes from, one mafia boss's sector to another mafia boss sector. Truck drivers, have to be bought off, and it basically increases the cost of doing business with Ukraine to unsustainable levels. This is why we can pour in, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military goods and, only see the equivalent of maybe, $50 billion worth of assistance, because the rest of it's being siphoned away. This isn't the way to do business. This isn't how you win a war. And the proof is what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. They're not winning the war.
Yeah, they're certainly not winning the war, Scott. But what actually is the situation? Because on the ground now, because it seems to me what Zelensky's behavior, and honestly the United States' behavior over this last year or so in the conflict appears to be more managing the conflict and attempting to save face rather than coming up with any kind of quote unquote solution to Russia's advance. So what's the reality on the ground, and how effective has this been? Has Ukraine actually saved face?
Perception creates its own reality. So I guess it depends where you're sitting when that question is asked. The Ukrainians, and you see Tony Blinken, you see Lloyd Austin sit there and they spend. Lloyd Austin today, Russia has lost 2/3 of its military power, 700,000 casualties, all this. So the implication is that, this tiny country, Ukraine, has, punched Russia in the teeth. And, that says something. It's interesting that he doesn't talk about how, I think it's the commander of the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, Christopher. I can't remember his name. Sorry about that. But he's recently come out and said that when this war ends, Russia will be stronger than it was when it started this war. So why is it that the commander of American forces in Europe, the war fighter, is saying that no? I mean, what's happening in Russia right now in Ukraine is, we've made a hardened, combat experienced army that's bigger and stronger than it was before the war started. How does that jive with Lloyd Austin's 2/3 of military power? It's a weakened power and all that. It doesn't. So that tells you that, again, perception, creates its own reality, unless the reality it's trying to create is so fanciful that it's really just fantasy. And that's what's happened here. There's this fantasy that Ukraine is somehow capable of forestalling disaster and turning the corner and reversing what Russia's doing. Ukraine's on a one-way trip to, la la land. The Russian army has been consistently advancing now for months. Their rate of advance has gone from 100 meters, 200 meters to a kilometer, 2 kilometers, now 5 kilometers, 12 kilometers a day. The Ukrainian army is falling back on a daily basis, and they don't have the troops necessary to prevent that from happening. So that's the state of play on the ground, where unless something that is done to change the correlation of forces, a sudden surge of Ukrainian trained manpower married up with modern equipment, that's not likely to happen. The Ukrainians are talking about having to, draft 18-year-olds, and you don't have enough time to train them, and so they'll go into battle ill-prepared. There's nothing that's going to change this tide, and we're looking at the inevitability of not just the military collapse of Ukraine, but also the political and economic collapse of Ukraine.
Yeah, in many ways, the economy of Ukraine has really already collapsed. I believe it's only functioning through just the continuous inflow of UK and US money, which could be drying up under a Trump administration that will be very keen on cutting back on any kind of money that's not just being sent to Ukraine, but perhaps being sent anywhere. But what I wanted to ask you, Scott, I was just thinking about as you were talking this, as we move into what will be a Russian victory. We don't have a timeline, obviously. We don't know when it's going to happen, but the writing is on the wall. This is a huge defeat for NATO, for the United States. This was supposed to be in new Cold War speak, the conflict that ends all conflicts, right? If you chop off the head of Russia via war in Ukraine, then guess what? The dominoes fall, right? So Russia's gone. Whatever's happening in the Middle East. I mean, Jake Sullivan believed the Middle East was all settled. So that's why you got to focus on Russia now and China. But if you get rid of Russia, then you can get to China. It seems to me, though, that with Russia's victory, this is going to have reverberations, like huge reverberations worldwide. It's not just going to be a matter that's settled between the U.S., NATO countries, Russia, and Ukraine. It's going to have an impact everywhere. What kind of impact do you see Russia's victory having worldwide, given the fact that, both you and I have been following Empire a long time? The United States, its foreign policy establishment, they love to just move on to whatever else they can move on to in order to achieve maybe similar objectives or the same objectives. Ukraine is different, though, because this is a direct conflict with Russia. And if you can't do that, how do you achieve that objective of defeating Russia, defeating China? It doesn't seem like it's possible. What do you think?
Had the Democrats stayed in power in the United States, had Kamala Harris won the election, we would see that the United States would be in concert with the European Union and NATO toward, coming up with policy that sustains the fight in Ukraine. But we have a new president that's going to be sworn in on January 20th, and he appears to be moving towards not only an end of that conflict, but stepping away from, NATO as a vehicle that gets America entangled in foreign wars. He doesn't want this. Trump has said on several occasions, I mean, most recently in September, that our entanglement with NATO is, part and parcel of this policy that has us serving as the world's policeman, getting involved in unpopular and unwinnable wars. He said that America is the greatest threat to America. This is Donald Trump speaking. So I don't think Trump wants to continue these policy traps. I think he wants to get out of Ukraine, and with that, reduce, if not eliminate, America's involvement with NATO altogether. Now we switch to NATO and the European Union. Had they just said, okay, we lost in Ukraine, let's draw a line and learn from it, I think that they could survive. But because they have defined themselves, the modern iteration of themselves, based upon their resistance to Russia across the board, these are people who have leveraged everything in sanctioning Russian energy, and they've paid a heavy price. They're committed to the strategic defeat of Russia to an extent that the United States isn't, especially Donald Trump. This, I think, creates an unsustainable political dynamic. And it's not just going to bring individual nations down politically. We've already seen that. Germany's having a very interesting election in February, and Alternative for Deutschland could win. We see Macron under a lot of pressure right now. His efforts to manipulate the outcome of an election by not empowering the political forces that actually won the election, but trying to create minority governments to keep these other people out, is failing. One after another, prime ministers go away. England's in a crisis. Austria just elected a right-wing person, etc. So we see a political dynamic in there. We see an economic dynamic as nations' economies start to slow down or actually begin to retrograde. And some people, when talking about Germany, could even talk about getting on the verge of collapse. But here's the big takeaway from this. Biden talks repeatedly, or has talked repeatedly, about, and so does Blinken and everybody else, NATO's never been more unified. NATO's never been more unified than they are right now. And the European Union is as strong as ever, and its relationship with the United States is as strong as ever. Except today, we had the French say, we're going to go to war against the United States if they try and take Greenland away from Denmark. Wait a minute, if you're so unified and NATO's so strong, what are you talking about going to war? And then you have other nations that just aren't interested in NATO. You have nations that can't meet their NATO obligations. Germany. NATO is weaker right now than it has been at any time, and NATO is on the verge of collapse. Donald Trump is not inclined to stay in NATO, and while ultimately there'll be a lot of pushback from Congress and from the establishment. There isn't going to be much pushback if NATO members continue to make stupid comments about wanting to go to war with the United States over Greenland. I mean, the best thing to do is just ignore it and say, well, we're going to wait until he does something. Why respond to a tweet? But instead, they're talking about the potential of having to fight the United States. That's the end of NATO. And European Union is falling apart. If AfD wins this election, they said they're unplugging from the European Union. The effort to, somehow align itself politically with Ukraine to talk about this greater European nation, it's failed. The European Union is a failed institution. It can't be resurrected or revived. And so I think we're looking at this war in Ukraine is going to reverberate more, as widely than just simply on the battlefield. I mean, we're looking at drastic tectonic shifts in Europe politically, the end of NATO alliance, the dismantlement or collapse of the European Union, the reemergence of the European continent defined not by a singularity, but by a multiplicity of competing nations. Then another one is, and I'll leave this brief, but what Russia and China, they have strengthened themselves because of the American and European reactions against Russia. Their relationship is stronger than ever. Their economies have adjusted. They're doing quite well. But one of the ways that they're manifesting this new health is through BRICS. And of course, Russia hosted BRICS in Kazan, had a very successful meeting. But most people don't understand there because, again, people who watch the news, they're looking for instant results. They basically want you to plant the seed in the ground, pour the water, and wham, there goes the beanstalk. They don't understand it actually has to grow. Were they keeping an eye out on, and this is where it comes to China. What just happened? Indonesia.
Yeah.
Indonesia is a full member of this. Malaysia and Thailand want to join.
Yeah.
Both, it's indicated that they will be allowed. That's Southeast Asia.
Yep.
Right there. The United States, this is another area where the United States, ASEAN is a form, an organization that the United States likes to believe it plays a dominant role. But Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand jumping to BRICS means that ASEAN is not going to be the big dog anymore. BRICS is going to be the big dog. And watch what happens to the Philippines, because they're not going to sit there and be alone in this. And you're going to, I think, see the Philippines jump as well. And that's the end of America's position in the Pacific, and it's all to the benefit of China. So there are consequences to this, to what's going on in Ukraine that reverberate globally.
Oh, 100%. I mean, Indonesia and purchasing power parity, I think, is like the fourth largest economy. Of course, it's not the fourth largest economy in real terms, but it has an immense, or the seventh largest economy, sorry. But it has immense importance. It already is very close to China, of course, economically. But the whole U.S. strategy against both Russia and China has been to form alliances, right? NATO, expand it, get it closer together, defeat Russia. In Asia Pacific, get all these countries you can, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, everyone you can, defeat China altogether. All of that is just completely eroding. And when Russia defeats Ukraine, when there is, of course, all wars, they end, whether they end in total defeat or whether there's a stoppage before the huge calamity, before Ukraine's government is absolutely taken over and becomes Russia again. Like, regardless of where and when this conflict ends, that plan, that strategy, if we can call it that, will completely fall apart, because NATO will be more disunited, more divided, more in disarray with really where else is it going to go? What is it going to do after that? And then with China, the rise of BRICS and everything that you stated, Scott, it's a very similar dynamic, but a defeat in Ukraine will just change everything around that and make it so that phenomenon only explodes even more, because how else will the world interpret this other than we need to do this? Most of the world is going to look at, we need to get out of the grips of US unipolarity, because look at what just happened to Ukraine. That could literally be any other country that the United States looks at and says, well, you're useful to try to fight a war against Russia, or you're useful. The special forces, they're talking about preparing for war with both Russia and China. How are they going to do it? Oh, they're going to do what they did in Ukraine, basically. They're going to go there. They're going to form relationships with the government. They're going to help them form these militaries, all the funding and the arms, and then they're going to fight. That's what happened in Ukraine. That's a completely disastrous model when the opponent is Russia and China, because these countries, they can stand up for themselves and they can defend themselves.
No, we're looking at a whole new paradigm. I will say this, though, that Trump, I'm not supposed to read your comments, but every once in a while I catch one going up. And one of the people, basically said, Scott Ritter thinks that Trump is a deep thinker, because I try to say that, he may have a plan, or he has a vision, or he has a way of doing things. I don't think Trump is a simpleton. I think sometimes he seeks simple solutions because that's less friction, easier to implement, etc. But I do think that Trump is capable of understanding complex problems, etc. And I think, Danny, what you just outlined in terms of the, China's, advantages, etc., it's all predicated on the United States allowing the collapse of NATO and the collapse of the European Union to become a tar baby, to use the old, Brer Rabbit folktale, got the tar baby and they get trapped and stuck and you can't get rid of it. Trump doesn't want to play that game. Trump wants to unplug from Ukraine and blame it on everybody but him. And then he's seeking to redefine the relationship with China. I mean, I don't want to get into it too much, but China is behind the decisions that Trump, behind Trump's statements about acquiring Greenland and the Panama Canal. It's based upon bad information. Chinese military isn't in the Panama Canal. It's two Hong Kong-based, management companies that are, effectively managing operations there. But, Trump says that's a threat. That's China. In Greenland, China, a couple of years ago was trying to put in some mines, but apparently those are faltering. There's not as much Chinese influence that they thought, but Trump believes that there could be. And what he wants to do is create a fortress America that will restrict Chinese operations and its sphere of influence, and then look to redefine how America is going to economically compete. So I think Trump is looking at a completely different paradigm than simply falling into the trap of closely aligning the United States with NATO and the European Union, and therefore getting caught up in all the turmoil of the respective collapses of those two entities.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are already so many pieces coming out all across the media, Western media, talking about their predictions. And I believe there's going to be a lot of support for this in the establishment. Their prediction is that Donald Trump will shift, right? The whole thing is to shift away from NATO, from Ukraine, and toward against Russia, and move toward what inevitably will be, while certainly, just like in the first Trump administration, there was military escalations with China. But it's going to be principally economic, and it's going to be economic war that he will be seeking, tariffs, maybe more sanctions, although he's made comments against sanctions. But with China's big economy, oftentimes they sneak in sanctions through technology justifications, technology, all this, patents, all this stuff. So that seems to be very realistic. To me, though, will it work? I just don't see it. I just don't see it because tariffs under Trump, one of the worst things about Trump's administration economically that he tried to do was introduce these big tariffs, and then a lot of companies in the United States, a lot of farmers, etc., they were very unhappy because the prices skyrocketed, and now we're in a whole new economic reality. The world has changed dramatically in the last several years alone since the Ukraine conflict began. I don't know. It's a different landscape. I guess that's been a theme here, is that this next Trump administration is not entering into 2016 conditions. It's just not the same world.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Look, I'm not an economist. Jeffrey Sachs is, and others. And I have yet to see somebody who comes out and says that this whole tariff scheme that Trump's talking about is going to be viable. Look, my wife wants it to be viable because he's talking about ending, income tax. Because if you tariff enough, you say, I'm going to do away with that. She's like, yeah, and so he has one big fan right there, saying, do it. But I don't know if tariffs can achieve what he wants to achieve. And there's many people smarter than me in economics who say, no, it's not going to be what Donald Trump says is actually be worse for the economy and be detrimental. So we'll see. There's a lot of, first of all, as tonight has proven, anybody who thinks they know what Donald Trump's going to do once he becomes president doesn't know what they're talking about unless they're Donald Trump. I think only he knows, and I don't think he knows fully. We're left to speculate. We read the tea leaves, we listen to statements, and we make speculations about what could happen, what seems to happen. We try to find, Trump isn't one to publish, the great plan where you open up, there's the map and the diagram that makes everything work, how brains normally function. And so what I have been guilty of is trying to impose some sort of structured, thought process and logic to what he's saying to make it appear like it's a plan. There is no Trump plan out there. There's no Trump plan published. We don't know what he's going to do, how he's going to do it, who he's going to do it with. Because a lot of the stuff requires us to say, well, then Marco Rubio is going to take a back seat, as Secretary of State. Now we're approaching dysfunction as opposed to normal functioning. So we just don't know. There's not enough information, which is why this next 10 days is so frustrating, because we get to watch the Biden administration just continue to reinforce one bad decision after the other for 10 more days. And then Trump's coming in, and I think there's going to be great expectations that he may not be able to fulfill. And it might be unfair to have these great expectations, but the Biden administration is so bad in so many things that, it's only natural to say, well, Trump got elected on a different platform, he's going to do better. But that's not a guarantee, because we don't know what it is he wants to do. He hasn't told us. Besides, take Greenland back in the Panama Canal.
Yeah. And then there's, of course, the factor of the entire political establishment, foreign policy establishment, the deep state, the economic elites, those who truly exert massive amounts of influence over not just U.S. presidents, but the entire political and military structure of the United States, what they will want, how they will get their way, because we saw a lot of that in the first Trump administration. And then on this, maybe we can, begin to wrap up here. But with the tariffs, it's so interesting that Donald Trump has extended his enthusiasm toward tariffs, because the Biden administration, Scott, I mean, I agree with this 100%. Disaster on every single front, and tariffs actually was one of them. So a big expectation for Biden was to relieve the tariffs that Trump initiated. Actually, when this is a typical one administration to the next, one party to the next in the two-party system, what happens is people expect the new, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, to reverse things that the prior administration has done. And what they end up doing is tacking on, extending, making worse. Obama extended the number of wars that the U.S. was actively engaged with from like 2 to 7 or something like that, just the bombing campaigns, and then let alone all the expansions of other things. But the tariffs, Biden has enacted tariffs, big tariffs, 100% on China's electric vehicles, for example. What has that done? Well, China is actually now kicking everyone's behind on producing electric vehicles. They've become self-sufficient in that arena, and now they're the leading car producer of all cars, electric vehicles, diesel vehicles, it doesn't matter. They lead. They've overtaken Germany. They've overtaken Japan. The U.S. is not, in the picture. They've overtaken. So that was one of the big consequences of Biden's economic policies toward China. And then he attempted to tariff them, and it's only made it harder for car companies, these big monopolies, to say, okay, yeah, we're gonna do the same here in the United States. Well, it turns out that when you have one country kicking your butt, that country has a lot of the know-how and the technological expertise, and you kind of need to know what they're doing. You kind of need to understand them, but if you're cut off from them, you're not going to really be able to learn how to compete. And that's been the big conundrum, it seems, for the United States with its sanctions and its tariffs.
Didn't the Chinese just sanction us, though, on basically they targeted our defense industry and our need for
minerals. Rare
earth
minerals. Yes,
we're not selling to you.
The one resource, Scott, that's China is a big manufacturing powerhouse, requires a lot of raw materials, things like energy, oil, things like that. It can't really produce it itself. One thing it does have, though, is rare earth minerals, an abundance of them. It's one of the reasons why Xinjiang is so important to the United States. It's because they see Xinjiang as, just like Ukraine, right? Look at the riches that Ukraine is saying. Well, a lot of U.S. foreign policy think tanks and analysts and establishment people who have whispers in the ear from these big monopolies, military industrial complex, are like, you got to get those minerals because we need them for the military industrial complex. Well, China's saying, no, we don't even want to trade them with you to you anyway. We don't even want to engage with you. So yeah, it's that is happening.
China has made they extended the Belts and Roads initiative off of the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor highway into Afghanistan, and one of the goals of that was to gain access to 3 different specific resources: the rare earth minerals, which Afghanistan is apparently sitting on a huge thing. Lithium, Afghanistan has significant lithium deposits, and oil. Iran is going into the Amu Darya region there and going to develop oil in Afghanistan, or not Iran, China. So the Chinese are there. In Greenland, one of the paranoias that one of the mining initiatives that China was seeking to embark on dealt with developing rare earth mineral deposits in Greenland. And if they have Greenland, Afghanistan, and China, they pretty much have cornered the market. And that's one thing that the United States isn't thrilled about, is that China has successfully cornered the market on rare rare earth minerals that play such an important role in modern electronics.
That's so true. A lot of people were like, in the United States and the West, like Greenland. Like, why is Trump talking about Greenland? Well, actually, there's been a big chunk of even the U.S. Elite who have looked at this Arctic region as the next battleground in this new Cold War with Russia, China. They see it because, I mean, look, if you just turn over the globe and become if you shed your flat earther syndrome and you just look at the round as we go, you see how that trade route and, of course, the resources and riches that a lot of these countries sit on and are seeking, then it becomes a huge deal. So Trump is not being random here. I think people look at Trump and say random. He's being funny.
No. It's been
I don't think it's random at all.
The only thing is, no, it's been part of the neoliberal and neoconservative. It's been on both of their tables to assess. One of the reasons is because of global warming. The Arctic is starting to open up to shipping, which creates a whole bunch of geopolitical issues, and it sort of gives Russia has the inside track, and we don't want Russia to have the inside track. And China has actually talked about extending its belts and roads up into the Arctic Circle. They're talking about an Arctic Silk Road and all that. So that's why when China comes in and starts sniffing around Greenland, everybody gets nervous because they're like, no, we don't want the Chinese to become, embedded and entrenched in this area. But the next big theater is the Arctic region. We're talking about Northwest Passage that could significantly shorten the time it takes to get equipment across. It's opening up. We're talking about as the ice caps melt, there will be land masses that are ready to be developed, and you're going to see competition. You're going to see the Arctic open up to being claimed. Russia has claimed it already, but again, if you flip it and Greenland now becomes America, we've changed a lot of the reality there. This is now American territorial waters, and it becomes a whole different game that's being played. So yeah, Greenland didn't just appear out of the blue. The thing that surprised that Trump never mentioned it during the campaign, so no one thought that he was thinking in that direction, but clearly he has been. And but yeah, he didn't invent the issue of Greenland. Greenland's been around for the controversy about the role that Greenland plays in securing the Arctic, and Thule Air Force Base, the early warning radars, and the strategic significance. The United States, I think there's many who say that we're vulnerable if we don't own it. That we've put too much capacity into a chunk of land that we're ultimately not in control of. And so from a strategic standpoint, we need to take control of that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be, and I'm glad that we work together, Scott, because it's going to be a very interesting next, even from January 20th onward, just a very interesting coming period for the United States and what is truly fledging, some could say flailing, but certainly desperate on so many fronts empire, which will be very interesting to watch as we enter now a Trump administration that is in a completely different situation than the prior, what we knew of a Trump administration in the first iteration. Will be very interesting to watch how he, but also just those forces around him, navigate all of this, because it definitely seems like there's going to be quite a lot of chaos and contradictions, and it seems like it's all going in the same direction, though, that the United States as this hegemon is really going in the opposite direction. It's kind of digging itself. It's saying it wants to maintain and expand, and it's actually going the opposite way the more that it does that.
Yeah, Trump has articulated wanting to do changes, but then it's changes in support not of rational policy, but a continuation of irrational policy, just taking a different tact. Again, is it rational for Trump to be talking about invading Greenland and occupying the Panama Canal? No, but that's what I think you could actually see a situation where the American empire, the reversal of the American empire, is halted and actually goes in the other direction as Trump comes in taking a different approach. And what it means is that when you have battle lines drawn over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years of trying to impose a rules-based international order on the world, and so as the Biden administration did in their national security strategy, identify what our priorities based upon the rules-based international order. When Trump says, the hell with the rules-based international order, I'm going to create something new, by redefining the battle lines, there's going to be pockets of no resistance. And you're going to see Trump pushing here, pushing there, pushing there. It's going to be like, oh, he's succeeding. But all that's happening is he's pushing until he reaches resistance. And then I think one of the dangers of the Trump policy approach is that it doesn't change how the United States really interface. What's the difference from the standpoint of BRICS to the rules-based international order or MAGA, Make America Great Again, aggressive foreign policy? None. And BRICS will oppose both. And then the United States will find itself getting in the same place eventually. And that is a place where we aren't able. Look, maybe one week you should do a show bringing nothing but Chinese experts. But
Sure.
What I'd like to hear, people talk about is the competitive factors. What makes the United States and China, what constitutes the competitiveness? How do we compete against one another? And where are the vulnerabilities of China and where are the vulnerabilities of the United States? And I have a feeling, as I said, I've looked at this, but I'm not a Jeffrey Sachs economist. My feeling is that China has far more resilience and far more diversity of economic opportunity than the United States does, and that at the end of the day, the United States is in an inferior position. What would it take, therefore, then for the United States to even the playing field? And why isn't Trump? Do Trump's policies align themselves with that? These are interesting questions because otherwise, I personally believe, and I'm finishing up an article on this, that that Trump, in moving towards this major economic adversarial relationship with China, is setting America up for disaster. Yeah. That what he's going to do is going to make our competitiveness even lag further with China, and there won't be the ability to recover from that to stabilize things. We could be looking at a genuine economic crisis for the United States on the global stage.
Yeah, and I won't take too long on this, Scott, but I know you've said, and I know we've heard Ray McGovern say, hey, if you want to know what Russia's thinking and what Russia's doing, just read what Russians are saying, read the media, read the speeches, listen to Vladimir Putin, listen to Sergei Lavrov, just listen to them and you'll know. The same can be said about China. And what's so interesting about this is that, China has basically said to the United States, we compete with us, fine. But if you're going to compete, then all of these policies you're doing toward us are actually counterproductive because they facilitate, and I'm not an economist either, but we can see this. The more aggression the United States, especially on the economic front, places onto China, the more that China is becoming self-sufficient, and the more that this duality of being able to be integrated in the world economy and much of the world dependent on China, plus being self-sufficient, well, that just means you have a double advantage. You have all the benefits of the world economy and all the benefits of being self-sufficient in very key industries. So if the United States wants to truly, as a capital economy, a market economy, compete with China, a lot of what Chinese say is, well, if you stop the economic aggression toward us and focus on how you can, innovate and develop the economy, this is no stranger to us, Scott. We talk about peace all the time. Hey, if you have conditions of peace, then you can focus on economic development and competing with us. Because China's not saying don't make electric cars, don't make trains, don't make high technology, 5G, 6G, all this. They're not saying don't do that. They're saying, hey, if you want to compete with us on this, it's probably better for you to stop economically trying to contain us. That's a lot of investment, a lot of resources, and it just so happened to have backfired. So that's at least what even just the most pragmatic Chinese scholars, experts, that's what they say. You can read the media. That's what they say. You just stop this, maybe you'll be able to compete. But if you don't, well, you'll further isolate yourself, because that's what's happened to the United States. Sanction Russia, sanction China, and guess what? There's you won't have a lot of friends doing that to such important players on the world economy. Any final thoughts, Scott? I know that we are getting late here, so definitely want to give you the last word.
No, I'm just reiterate the point you made. I think we've tried to strangle China's ability to manufacture high quality chips for computers, chips with a certain computing capacity. I think the Dutch may have had some sort of lithographic printing capability that Taiwan uses, and we have denied China the ability to gain access to both the chips and the specific technologies associated with the manufacturing of that. What the Chinese did is what nobody else can do. They can muster unprecedented national resources and focus it on achieving an outcome that might not have made economic sense or social sense if China could access this on the free market. But what we did in denying China the ability to buy lithographic machines to possess these chips is, as you said, they've solved the problem on their own, and they have created an indigenous chip, manufacturing and research and development plant that is artificially hastened in terms of its the time it takes for innovation. Things in reality happen under a normal pace, of events, because humans fall in on, we need to sleep, we need to eat, we want to go on vacation, we want to do this, that, and the other thing. The Chinese, though, have the ability to compress it just by bringing in overwhelming resources. And so, whatever techniques they use, they're able to do things far quicker than the West could possibly think. And I think China took the West by surprise on this chip thing, because we're like, oh, they're denied. It's like, the old thing, the Russians have to take chips out of washing machines to fire missiles. The Chinese don't have this ability because we've denied them the chips. And all of a sudden, China's sitting there going, not only do we have this ability, but we're into the next generation.
Right.
And I just think this has to be factored in when we talk about what we're getting ready to do with China. I mean, we're getting ready to go into a weightlifting contest with somebody who just spent the last 30 years in the gym shooting steroids and lifting weights, and we've been eating potato chips on the couch. I think the Chinese they're not perfect. There are vulnerabilities that the United States could exploit, but I don't think those vulnerabilities require finesse. And the United States right now, we're the opposite of finesse, and we're getting even a less finesse person that get ready to take office. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. No, sir. It's just China. China is, as you said, like, it has this capacity to move very, very, very fast. And Scott, we often talk here on this program about very immediate, like when you're here, we've had so many conversations where you've just been like, we need to stop this nuclear war. Like, we are on the precipice. Like, we need to be scared of this. And oftentimes, that could be perceived as, well, we're just talking about some immediate thing, like very immediate danger, all of humanity, a very important point of well, if humanity is gone and we all die, nothing can really be accomplished. But the extent of extending that, yeah, we need what could be possible if the United States wasn't tied up, wasn't spending trillions, wasn't moving to the precipice of nuclear war, wasn't trying to contain China, wasn't trying to destroy Russia, wasn't trying to commit regime change against any unwanted states. Well, perhaps then there would be room to uh, innovate and create and prosper and move toward a model of economic development which is conducive to the kind of achievements that now China is showing are totally possible if you're not tied up in foreign and imperial entanglements to such a to any extent, because it's obviously such a weight and an albatross and this ball and chain now on the United States's future. We're not going to have a future where we have the ability to travel from Chicago to Boston in 4 hours. We'll never have that ability by high-speed train. We'll never have the ability to create these electric vehicles, new energy, all of this that's conducive to people's needs. Look what just happened in Los Angeles, like absolutely devastating. There's no public infrastructure there for a state like California to address such a massively devastating problem like these wildfires. So imagine what I mean, for me, it's just like, imagine what we could do if we weren't always having to talk about the United States moving, foreign policy, moving toward nuclear war, moving toward war with China and war with Russia. That's kind of.
Yeah, but then we wouldn't be talking about the United States. We'd be talking about something different, because the United States, especially since the 1950s, has fallen victim to what Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial congressional complex and the confluence between Congress's ability to power the purse lined up with industries who are, their purpose is to make money and then feed that money back into Congress. So it becomes this closed loop. And we need wars in order to justify that. So, if we did that, that means we have to change who we fundamentally are, and we haven't done that. Maybe Trump can do something. I don't know. I mean, he seems to be in love with the defense industry, but I think he also recognizes that we need to revive our civilian industry. And if we're going to do half the infrastructure redevelopment or modernization that needs to be done, we're going to need industries to come back to America. And if Trump can achieve that, then great. If not, we're in trouble. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's a good place to stop here, Scott. Everyone, be sure. First of all, thanks for all the super chats, super stickers. I put up as many as I could on the screen. Be sure to head to the video description to find Scott Ritter's Telegram, his website, where you can find the book events that he has coming up in the middle of this month. This will be a bi-weekly program. Now that there's this book tour, though, we'll announce when the next one is happening and then go from there on a regular schedule. So tune in, be sure to follow here, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you get all those notifications for this program. Be sure also to go to the video description for all the ways you can support this work, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. Before you leave, hit the like button, because that will help keep the stream going at least late into the evening here in the US and wherever you are, probably the morning elsewhere. So, Scott, any final words before we head out?
No, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you this year. It's going to be a very dynamic year. So
yes,
I've
been saying bumpy ride, but dynamic. I like that. It's definitely going to be dynamic. All right, everybody, take care. Good night, good morning, wherever you are, and see you next time.